There we go. What am I? Why am I all blurry? There we are. Hello. Hello, chat. How are you today? I have heard a rumor that it's a bit hot in various parts of the world right now. It's certainly hot here. Not as hot as I've heard it is in other places. So I hope everyone's staying reasonably cool. You all know the strategies and things for that, hopefully. Water. That's a good tip. It's a good, if you don't have air conditioning, you can sort of make your own makeshift air conditioning by splashing water on your face all the time. That's what I always do during these streams because it gets kind of hot in here. Everyone, welcome. Today is going to be an interesting new format for the stream. We have something new, which is, I don't know, I always call these things whatever with me, right? So research with me. We are going to read some linguistics papers together, hopefully ones that will be of interest to conlangers especially. So we're going to be looking into stuff from typology, actually from the journal entitled Linguistic Typology. And we're going to read through them, get some interesting information from them, but also we're going to have a sort of meta goal, which is to learn how to read linguistics papers, because it's not something that necessarily, it's not something that's obvious necessarily. And when I was first starting to read things, I totally misunderstood where my attention should be in the paper. And so hopefully we can impart some of those tricks of the trade. Southern Hemisphere is winning right now. Absolutely. Okay, so I guess we should say hello to our future YouTube viewers and just get started. Okay. Goodness gracious, YouTube, welcome back. It is good to see you here. We're about to jump into a new kind of segment called Research with Me. And in this segment, we are going to be reading a linguistics paper together and trying to see what we can get out of it. And so today we are going to be reading, we're going to be reading a new paper that's come out in Linguistic Typology in the journal this year, 2022, called A Typology of Consonant Inventory Gaps. So chat, this is the reveal. We're going to be looking at some phonological typology today. At least first. We have some other papers that we're going to look at later. But first we're going to jump in with some phonological typology and look at consonant inventory gaps. So let's scoot over to this side webcam. And we have our setup here. We have on the left the paper. I may need to move my camera at some point, but we'll see how we do. On the left the paper, and on the right the notes. And we have a really cool feature of the journal Linguistic Typology, you can see, is that they give IPA for their authors. So this is Nikolaev 2022, this paper. So let's do our very first thing, and let's write in Nikolaev 2022. This is the format that I take my notes in, just to put the citation there, and then I like the title in the title of the note as well. Cool. So we are going to try and get out of this something useful for us. So this is the first kind of tip, is when you're approaching a linguistics paper, or a paper in any field, but I'll stick to what I know. It's good to go in with kind of a goal. You'll end up not being as effective if you just go into the paper and say, paper, teach me everything that you have inside. It's better if you come in with a question that you're curious about, that you're trying to get an answer to or trying to get more information on. And then that way that sort of helps those aspects of the paper leap out at you. So it will generally be a pretty significant waste of time to try and exhaustively extract all the information from a paper, at least on the first read through. And it's not always worth it. I mean, I'm not going to say anything about any particular paper, but there are some papers that are very central and important, and some papers that are less so, and they're more minor, and you don't want to spend as much time on them as you do on the really central ones that are going to help you. Okay, so yeah, we have Jake, you're right. We have Obsidian up on the right here. This is not my main vault for Obsidian. This is one that's special for YouTube because I think all my little doohickeys and things would get in the way. But nevertheless, really great program. If you aren't using Obsidian, you don't know about it, check it out. It's very cool. All right. So, okay, we have a question. Cicinho is asking, where do we get these papers? Well, luckily, we have certain journals which have open access. And Linguistic Typology is a journal that has open access for some of its articles at least. So we can go onto, you go to the journal's website. Here it is, Linguistic Typology. You look in issues, say volume 26, issue 1, and then you can see what is open access. So there's one on appositive possession in Ainu and around the Pacific. Interesting. And here is our paper here, a typology of consonant inventory gaps. And then you just go in. You can read it in HTML, which some people might like, but then you get ugly things like, where is it? I saw something ugly. Actually, this looks kind of nice. Well, sometimes you get, yeah. So the figures end up just being sort of plopped in there with this white background, and if you're in the dark mode, it's not as nice. But you can read it here, or you can read it as it was sort of intended to be read in the, no, that's not the paper. Where is it? I've lost it. There we go. In the PDF. So, oh yeah, okay, so typology. Oh, that's a great question. Echo, thank you. Typology is the study of the variation in human languages and what the nature and limits of that variation is. So typology is probably the most relevant part of linguistics for people making constructed languages that are naturalistic, because typology is going to give you basically all of your information as to ideas of what's a possible human language. So typology, depending on how you want to approach it, can answer things like what is the range of variation in human languages? What is a possible human language? What's another good question that typology can answer? Are there associations between different kinds of language, different traits in language? How do we distinguish between the effects of genetic relatedness, so languages in the same family, from areal influence, languages that are sort of live around each other start to become more alike sometimes, and then similarities that arise due to the sort of structure of how language works. So some aspect about the human mind or the human body that makes language look the way it does. So that is that's the gist of typology. Hopefully I've given it a fair shake. It's a particularly beloved field for me. It's what I wrote my dissertation on. And so in typology papers, you'll see a concern with expressing language universals. So things that are purportedly true of all languages. You'll see things like ideas of, well, universals. I'll come to the full screen because this is kind of narrative-y. Linguistic universals, which are things that are true of all languages. You also have things like statistical universals, which are things that are true of most languages, kind of stretching the definition of universal there a bit, I think. Implicational universals. So you'll have, if a language has this feature, it'll also have this other feature. So having feature A implies having feature B. Those are implicational universals, and there are a lot of implicational universals that have been proposed. So typology is all over that. Romka's saying that there's a low tone. This is the air conditioning. So let me see if I can fix that at all. Make this a little less sensitive, or maybe I can turn it off. Be in solidarity with the people who don't have air conditioning. Lucy, question: Is the sound okay on your end, or are we? Is it too interfering? Interfering-y, technical term introduced 2022. Colin Gorrie. I'll wait briefly before I go further to hear back from Lucy. Well, while we're waiting, yeah, so typology is fun. Typology it interacts with theoretical linguistics because you want a linguistic theory to generate so if you have a theory about how language works, it should be compatible with the kinds of languages that exist. So you often see a kind of give and take between theories of language structure and theories of language variation or linguistic diversity. You also have an interaction between historical linguistics and typology. So when you are reconstructing when you're reconstructing proto-languages, you want to reconstruct a language that is typologically valid or typologically realistic. So you generally don't want your reconstructed language to look unlike every other language that has been described. And then there are fierce debates over how what the role of typology should be in theoretical linguistics and in historical linguistics as well. And I will one day rant about all of that because that is a very dear topic to my heart. Maybe Lucy has stepped out, so I'm gonna go and I'm gonna turn off the air conditioning so that we can have pristine audio quality. So I'll be right. Okay. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt the band. Okay, so we're back. Hopefully, no low buds. No low buzz. Okay, so yeah, where were we? We're talking about typology, and we're talking about a typology of constant inventory gaps. So let's take that idea of typology that I introduced and apply it to something concrete. So typology is going to study the range of variation of a particular phenomenon. So you can have phonological typology. This is the range of variation and diversity in sound systems. You can have morphological typology, the range of variation in sort of the morphological component of the grammar. So things like what kind of affixation is possible? Does suffixation of this imply suffixation of that other kind of morpheme? You can have a syntactic typology. You can have all sorts of different kinds of typology. Here we're talking about phonological typology. So we're talking about consonant inventories, and we're talking specifically about gaps in consonant inventories. So you often encounter in like first year phonology, this idea that we have an inventory. Let's see if I can get an inventory up. So let's look at Spanish. Let's see if we can see the constant inventory here. So there's an idea that basically there's a tendency for languages not to have gaps in their inventories. So if you have things going across, if you have places of articulation distinguished in, say, stops, you'll probably have most of those distinguished in the nasals. If you have a voicing distinction in the labials, you'll probably have them in the dentals and the alveolars as well, this kind of thing. So, as you can see, Spanish does have some gaps. We have no dental nasal in this analysis, but we have an alveolar nasal. We have no velar nasal, even though we might expect there to be if we were hardcore gap fillers. We have no voiced. Let's see. No, we never have any voiced fricatives. I guess that technically is. Well, yeah. So as you can see, it's a bit of a messy thing. It's not a generalization that holds 100%. And so the investigation, where is it? There it is. The investigation is trying to investigate. Sorry, the heat is now officially starting to get to me. Solidarity, we can do it. So someone who's interested in the typology of constant inventory gaps is interested in if there's any sort of rhyme or reason to what kind of gaps are possible. All right, so great. Introduction done. Now we're confronted with this paper, and we have to come in with our sort of our question of interest. So we want to know, what does it mean? I'm going to come up with a thing that we might be interested in coming to this paper. So what does it mean for a constant inventory to be naturalistic? So this is a kind of a question that a conlanger might ask. And so I know a lot of us in the chat today fit that description. So I think that's a good one for us to go with. Let's see if I can. Is the font big enough for you? I think I might need to. Where's the? There we go. Great. How is that for size? Is that good? What does it mean for constant inventory to be naturalistic? So this is our kind of research question. This is why we've picked up the paper to begin with. God. Oh, God. Windows. Yeah, okay, I got to find those windows again. Okay, good. Yeah, we're back. All right, so what does it mean for a constant inventory to be naturalistic? And we may find something interesting about this in this paper. Okay, so first thing we do, reading a paper, we want to look at the abstract if it's there. And this is supposed to give us the sort of the gist of the paper. What is the most important thing in the paper? I think it's worth us copying this over into our notes. And for those following along at home, I have not read this paper at all. This is the first time I've seen it. I think that should probably be fairly obvious from the way I'm taking it in, but just so you know, we haven't gone and made the cake off screen and brought it on. This is all actually real research. Okay, so this is our abstract. We have a new precise algorithmic definition of phonological inventory gap. So we have a definition of the term phonological inventory gap, formal definition. Method for identifying gaps. Okay, that's fine. That's kind of in with the definition. Provide descriptive data on several types. So, interesting. Types of consonant inventory gaps. Consonant inventory gaps. And, relationships between gaps and inventory size. I'm going to use some abbreviations here. Gaps and inventory size. And relationship. I'm going to go really hardcore with the abbreviations. Between gaps and sound change. Relationship between This X abbreviation I just made up, but I found it very useful when taking notes. X, I just abbreviate ION to X. I don't know if anyone else does that or that's just a me thing. Relationship between gaps and segment borrowing. Okay, cool. So these are the things we'll be on the lookout for. We can probably turn these into little sections. Great. Okay. So let's go. Keywords. Yeah, I mean, I guess those are fine. I think those are there for people searching. Don't have to worry too much about that. Okay, so then generally linguistics papers have a structure, and they're not like most papers in the natural sciences. They have this kind of, so they obviously have an introduction and a conclusion like every paper does, but they tend not to go through the usual sort of like materials and methods, materials, methods, what are all the ones that they have, analysis, discussion. It's more freeform than that. So as you can see here, we have usually at the end of the introduction a little, this paper is organized as follows section. And so we have section 2, surveys related work on the subject. So this is the lit review. So if you want to understand a subject, and a good way to do that is, or like a specific topic, is a good way to do that is go into a recent paper and just find this section. And it will give you a admittedly partial, perhaps biased view, but it'll give you a good view of the sort of history of work on the question. And it's usually the second section. Then section 3 provides definitions of several classes of inventory gaps. So this is where it gets quite freeform. Depends what your next sections are is going to really depend on the paper. So definitions of several classes of inventory gaps. Okay, so essentially it looks like it's going to proceed according to what's described in the abstract, which is good, nice organization. So we can see the author says, provide a method for identifying gaps and a definition, then descriptive data of the different types, then investigate these relationships. So it looks like section 3 is the definition and the algorithm. Section 4 is one of the types, within manner. Section 5 is another one of the types, between manner. We'll get into that soon. Section 6 is about the relationship between gaps and inventory size. Section 7 is a relationship between gaps and area. So this macro area is a particular way of coding a part of the world in which the language is traditionally spoken. Section 8 then talks about the relationship between inventory gaps and sound change. And then section 9 is gap filling and segment borrowing. And then section 10, obligatory conclusion. So when you're approaching a paper like this, this is where your question becomes relevant. Because if you are doing this because you need to write a lit review of your own, you probably don't need to pay as close attention to every single section. You will probably want to really hone in on the abstract, the introduction, and the conclusion. So if we go down to section 10, you'll see the introduction and the conclusion are kind of like the interface of the paper with the outside world, with the future in particular. So the introduction and the conclusion are the ways in which the contents of the paper relate to what the author hopes will be the papers that cite, the paper that cites this work. So that's how I think of it about it anyway. The intro and the conclusion are relationships to the future. The lit review is relationship to the past. There's sometimes some relationship to the past in the introduction as well, especially if they're arguing against someone. Depending on what you're interested in. So if you're interested in tracing the development of a field, you might really care about this, who's arguing against whom, what are the different strains of debate. If you're more interested in the data itself, you probably do not care about that. So if you're more interested in the data itself, you would then just go, look at the intro to orient yourself in the paper, but then you would go to the relevant body section that you're interested in. So if you want to know, what I'm really interested in is what is the relationship between inventory size and gaps, then just hone into the specific section that does that. Obviously, it's good to read the whole thing, but we're not going to focus equally on all of them. So I think for us, I'm not super interested in the longer history of this question today. I'm more interested in the data itself. So we will probably spend most of our time looking into some of these body sections. Let's see. I'll give some examples of all of that kind of broad look at the paper structure that I just gave. So here we see, so we're in the introduction. We see the job of the introduction is kind of to set the stage, situate the question. Why is this important? So why are we supposed to think this is an important question? It's because we have, on the one hand, there's a set of consonants that are found in most languages of the world, and it's notable when those are absent. So why does a theory of typology care? Because a theory of typology is trying to establish what the limits of variation are. And if there are certain things that tend not to happen very often, that for some typologists becomes an interesting fact that has to be explained. So a theory of typology will want to account for the fact that these consonants are rarely absent. These commonly found consonants are absent. But we also don't want to, so let's look at this example. So M is a common consonant. If it's rare, that's something that makes us sort of perk up and say, oh, that's interesting, a language that doesn't have M. Whereas voiced pharyngeal fricatives are rare enough on their own, and we don't consider that to be a gap. Let's see. So that's one definition of gap. And then there's another definition of gap, which is the one that I alluded to earlier, when we have these charts with missing, with cells not filled in that you think might be filled in, because if you go across one way, they're all filled in, and then you go down, they're all filled in, but there's one that's kind of missing. All right. So it's not. So this is kind of like a conditional notion of, we're surprised to find this consonant not here. So we're surprised to find an M missing, no matter what language we're talking about. But we're not surprised to find an F missing, unless we also see P, B, and V, because we have a kind of paradigm here. We have voiced and voiceless distinction in the stops. We know we have a stop fricative distinction because we have V, but we don't have F. And it seems like if we're used to making the voiceless voice distinction in the stops, we should be able to make that in the fricatives as well, especially if we have the voiced one. Because, obstruents, which includes stops and fricatives, are sort of prototypically voiceless. So if you only have one, it's usually the voiceless one. Anyway, and here's another example. So if you don't have B, if you don't have the voiced bilabial stop, is that really a gap? Well, only if you have other voice stops. If you have a language with just PTK, it's not that surprising that it wouldn't have B. If it had three stops and they're pataka, no one's going to say, isn't it weird that it doesn't have B? Okay. So then that's the sort of basis of this paper, or not of this paper in particular, but of the whole question of constant inventory gaps. And we have some discussion of previous attempts to answer this question. And the motivator for this paper is that people have been speculating about this for a long time, but we don't have comprehensive statistical data. So if we don't have comprehensive statistical data, it's very hard to do a typological investigation of something, because you want to know how common and how rare certain things are, whether they're clumped in certain areas, whether they exist only within certain families. This allows us to disentangle whether something is part of a genetic inheritance of a particular family, it's part of an areal effect, or it's something to do with language itself. However you want to define language itself. Okay, so questions so far about the general approach, about this paper, about typology, about tips for beating the heat. I'll put in a little pause here so that we can chat, because we're doing a bit more hardcore stuff today than normal. So frequent breaks, stretching, hydration, all good stuff. Jake asks, are there examples of typological questions that have been answered? Sort of. There are the kind of like really, really, really robust universals. So things like no language forms questions by reversing the order of words in the sentence, So I eat cake, cake eat I went to the store the to went I. That doesn't happen. So those kinds of questions, those kinds of generalizations have survived, have stood the test of time. Other questions like, what's the relationship between order of verb and object and other sort of word order questions? I think it's fair to say that those have been answered and that we have pretty good data about them and we know what the associations are. But the problem with declaring a typological question answered is, what is our goal in doing typology? Is it to come up with a description of the state of affairs in the world, the distribution of linguistic features? So we have languages that do this, we have languages that do that, and this is a list of the ones that do, and this is a list of the ones that don't. Remember, we only have a finite number of languages. So conceivably, you could finish that job and you'd be done. Or is the job of typology to use that data to allow us to explain some other aspect of language? And I think many linguists, not all, but many linguists fall into the second camp, where they, I don't know, don't pin me down on this question today, but they use typology to argue about one particular theory. So the typological data is good evidence for this particular theory of the structure of language, or the typological data is good evidence for this particular reconstruction of this proto-language. Echo's asking, have there been many controversial typological theories? Basically, I think they're all kind of controversial. But any in particular? Well, the big controversy is, what is the role of typology? I think that's where the controversy comes in the most. It's less so that there's one particular proposal about, this universal. People argue back and forth that it's true or it's not. I think it's more, why do we do typology and what is its role? That's where the controversy comes in. Okay, cool. I'm going to put in a little cut for YouTube and then we'll come back. YouTube, we've been researching together. How do you like it so far? I don't know. It's hardcore, but it's fun. We'll get back to it. Come back and we will see you soon. Oh yeah, that's true. The word class stuff is pretty controversial. Do all languages have nouns and verbs? Yeah. It's interesting because depending on where you go in linguistics, things become controversial or not. sort of within certain bubbles, I guess you might say. And it's part of the wonderful diversity of the field, of course, but some things become a problem for one group of linguists that are just totally uncentral, like they're very peripheral concerns, or they're not considered something worth explaining, or they're just assumed for others. And the question of the meta question of what questions are the real questions is an endless source of debate and fighting and chair throwing at conferences. I always say chair throwing at conferences like it's a joke, but the lore is that it has happened. So, yeah. Right. Okay, so gonna gear back up, get back in, and we'll do some more. I don't think I need to splash water yet. I feel the temperature rising, but we can do this. I'm if you can do it, I can do it. And if I can do it, you can do it. Right? I don't know. Let's find out. Hello, YouTube. It is very hot today. If you watch this in the future, you may think back to what kind of a day July 19th, 2022 was where you were in the world. Maybe it was lovely weather. I don't know. But for a lot of people, including a lot of people in the audience and the presenter, it is not. So let's beat the heat and do some linguistics. Let's research. We are talking about a typology of consonant inventory gaps. Nikolaev 2022, a paper, and we are sort of learning to read linguistics papers as we go. So off to the side. Hope I don't get canceled for my views on typology. I don't know, it could happen. All right, so we've looked at this. This paper is called Typology of Consonant Inventory Gaps. And we've come to it with this idea of what does it mean for a consonant inventory to be naturalistic. This is the abstract, where it tells us its sort of goals, and we've taken out from these from the abstract some questions that we have some interest in, or some topics. So one, a formal definition of a phonological inventory gap. This may or may not be interesting to us, depending on what it ends up being. I think the goal here is to get something that can be sort of operationalized rather than an intuitive notion of a gap. So it's always necessary before embarking on any kind of research to get a definition that you can actually latch onto and not be able to quibble about. So if you define it specifically, that gets rid of your wiggle room, right? You can't say, oh no, but I meant it like this, and you have to make it nice and precise and crisp along the edges so people can argue against it or for it. So that's why we have this. Then I think this is going to be where we really are having fun. Types of consonant inventory gaps, and then the relationships between gaps and inventory size, and the relationships between gaps and sound change, the relationship between gaps and segment borrowing. So do languages seek to fill gaps in the inventory in the course of sound change or in the course of borrowing? That is it. Okay, so moving on. So last time we looked at the intro, and now we can take a look at this related work. We're probably not going to spend time on here because that's not our goal today. Just a lot of, what did people do in the past on this question? And you can see the author try to group people into people pursuing the same kind of line of questioning, people who disagree with each other. Usually, it's common to set up maybe 2 or 3 main approaches and then classify the previous work into that. So that's fun, but we don't really care about that today. Defining and identifying gaps. So, formalized definition of 2 kinds of inventory gaps. Interesting. Okay, so we're going to limit our data set to include place of articulation, manner of articulation, and voice onset time. Okay, so right away to make this a tractable question, we have to zoom in a bit. So we're talking about place, manner, and VOT. So this is going to be things like, voiced versus voiceless versus aspirated. Place, obviously, things like labial, coronal, dorsal, and maybe some more specific distinctions within those. Manner, stops, fricatives, affricates. The author specifically says place of articulation is unrestricted, so presumably we have more than just these three. We might have velar, uvular, etc. But manner of articulation is only voiceless and voice stops, fricatives, and affricates. Okay, so it's actually, we're not going to be doing aspirated as well. And we'll see what kind of places are distinguished. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. If I say blah, 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 by the way, it's not because I don't think it's valuable, but, just I'm trying to move on our, if the author of this paper comes and watches this video, welcome. This is awesome. There's no disrespect intended by saying blah, blah, blah. All right. Gap generating triplets. Gap-generating triplet is a triplet of consonants such that two pairs of consonants from it are featural minimal pairs with respect to two different features, and the members of the third pair differ in the values of both of those features. Interesting. Okay, so this is an attempt to formalize this idea of a gap being implied by other consonants existing in the inventory. So let's take the example that the author gives, B, D, Z. So let's see what we can do here. So BDZ, so we have, I'm going to make a little table. Voiceless, voice. This is not going to be a standard inventory table, but to mark down tables, always fun. I don't have, there we go. All right. So we have then labial. I used to have in my main vault, I have a plugin that does this for me. It makes the tables nice. I won't subject you to much of this, but I want to explain this. Okay, so we have my beautiful table here. Apologies for the delay in getting this set up. Beautiful table here, and we have what? We have a voiced labial. We have a voiced coronal. Oh no. What am I doing? It's not voiceless and voiced. They're all voiced. Okay, so then we have labial coronal here. And we have stop fricative here. This is more familiar looking. All right. So we have this. And now we have labial stop, coronal stop, labial, coronal fricative. So notice that we have two sort of oppositions here, the place and the manner, and we have a gap. So this is a definition that tries to formalize what it means for something to be a gap. Oh, Logan, you know this paper, the triplet paper? Gap generating triplets. Okay, so that's why we have this concept of a gap generating triplet. So in the inventory, we have three things that seem to imply a fourth. Why don't I exist? So in order to construct or identify gap generating triplets, GGTs, it is necessary to fix the value of one of the three selected features. When one fixes the manner of articulation, one obtains within manner, GGTs. When one fixes the VOT, one obtains between manner, GGTs. Okay, so for example, BDZ is a between manner GGT on voiced stops and fricatives, and PTD is a within manner GGT on stops. Okay, I think we have to understand this terminology. It's not super self-explanatory. So when you fix the manner of articulation, so within manner GGTs, fixed manner varying place and VOT, between manner GGTs, fixed VOT, varying place and manner. Right. Okay, so this then is a between manner GGT because it fixes the voice onset time. We're only talking about voiced segments. Interesting. Okay. And PTD, patada, is a within manner GGT on stops. Right. Because we are fixing the manner and varying the place and voice onset time. Okay, I get it. Chat, do you get it? I think that's cool. Any such triplet implies the potential existence of the fourth consonant that will close the square. Close the square. Great, okay. Okay, and this is how the analysis was done. Great, we don't really worry about that. Here, a constant inventory is has a gap if there's a segment that can be associated with at least one GGT. Okay, that's fairly self-explanatory that follows. Cool. Okay, now we have an idea of direct and inverse gaps. Given the tendency for stops to be found at more places of articulation than fricatives in any given language, and so, okay, let's write these down. So, more stops than fricatives. These are tendencies. More contrast in place for stops than fricatives. This is you might call a universal. There's more contrast in place for stops than fricatives. There's more contrast in place for fricatives than affricates. And keep in mind that when we say universal in typology, it's not necessarily actually universal. It's often just a tendency. Okay. I call the gaps where the missing segment belongs to a less typologically diverse class direct gaps. And the gaps where it begins to a more diverse class, inverse gaps. Oh no, linguistics terminology is gonna get us. Okay, so we have we have more place contrasts in stops than fricatives than affricates. No. Number of contrasts of place contrasts. If the gap is, okay, this only applies for between manner gaps like this one. If the gap is in the less diverse class, so between stops and fricatives are there are fewer of them. There tend to be fewer of them, fewer distinctions. So this would be a direct gap because the gap is in the fricative, and that typically is what you would, if you expect it to be anywhere, you'd expect it to be there. An inverse gap would be if we had, what should that be? Something like this, or sorry, V, and then we have nothing here. This would be an inverse gap. Okay. Great. So let's write this down. Direct gap. Gap in the manner that typically has fewer contrasts, place contrasts. Inverse gap. Gap in the manner typically has more place contrasts. Interesting. Okay. So this is only for between manner gaps. All right. Okay, here's the analysis. Here's the data. Good stuff. So this is interesting. This is interesting. The sample we have divided into macro areas. These are kind of consonant. I have consonants on the brain. Continent-sized areas. So we have Africa, Australasia, Eurasia, North America, Papunesia, South America, and no data. So they've given not one of the traditional continents here, but they've given the sort of island-filled area in the South Pacific, I guess. So the idea is between Australasia and Asia, that realm, its own area. Then we see the breakdown by family. Okay, cool. This is cool if you're interested in the sort of empirical base of this research, but let's just assume that it's good to go. And what else do we have? Okay, so we have within manner gaps. Right. So this is actually, we don't have to worry about this too much. Well, let's leave it in and I'll just say gap generating triplets. We put this in our types of constant inventory gaps. So we have direct gaps, inverse gaps. We have within manner and between manner. That's cool. Okay, then what do we have for the stops? So within manner stop gaps. Within manner. So let's look at stops first. Stops. Within manner stop gaps. Oh, you see some interesting patterns here, don't you? The most common is G. And then the next most common is P. So with the voiced, you get the gap most frequently occurring in the dorsal place of articulation, but with the voiceless, you get it most frequently occurring at the labial place of articulation. And there are good phonetic reasons for that. Yeah, same goes for the uvular voiced. So. And then what else do we have? After the these first two, which are over 100, then the next most common tier is the uvular, which definitely has some phonetic basis, but then the d and b, which is next. And that, the author points out, doesn't seem to have any articulatory or auditory reason for these segment to be absent. So that's interesting. The voiceless bilabial stop is a frequent gap, but it's often found in particular areas. And no North American or Australian language has a gap for P. So strong aerial effects for P. Let's say phonetic basis. The uvular G has a phonetic basis, but D and B are somewhat mysterious. What else do we have? Yeah, Logan, I think that's a pretty good explanation, is that voice things are marked for obstruents, and so there you go. If you're going to have the voiced ones marked, then you expect D and B here. It's interesting, we have the palatal stops quite high up here, and the author discusses the tendency of these stops to become affricates. So, oh, that's nice. It goes right to the citations. Okay, so then we have the next most common are these the unstable tend to become affricates. Cool. And then there's some more things. All right. Then let's talk about fricatives. The top spot is the voiced glottal fricative. And by far, oops. Cool. And actually, the author points out that the whole top 5 of the gaps for fricatives are voiced. So this comes back to what Logan just said, which is that voicing is generally, for obstruents, I'll add, harder, or at least more marked, or there's some additional, they're less common, they're more, they're marked, however you want to interpret that statement. And I know there are many ways. All right, so what else do we have? We have that in the top spot. We have je, ze, ve, re in the next. All voiced. And then the next is ch. And that seems, let's see what this says. The situation here seems to be the mirror image of the that of palatal stops described above. A diachronic interpretation suggests itself. Suggests. I love, this is a great academic phrase. Things suggest themselves. While palatal stops tend to become affricates, velar stops tend to lenite to fricatives. Why does that? Why is that why does that interpretation suggest itself? If ch is the most common gap, am I missing something here? The fact that velar stops tend to lenite to fricatives doesn't suggest that that would be a gap, does it? It suggests it would be more common. Question. I don't know if I'm on board with this this self-suggesting interpretation. By the way, I write like that too, so it is how it is. All right, affricates. Thomas writes, because it's a gap, because presumably ch is a gap, k is more likely to fill it. But wouldn't that in that case wouldn't that cause the gap to be in the stops, not the fricatives? Doesn't it just doesn't seem to follow for me. Because it's a gap, because like whether k changes to ch, whether k changes to ch, and whether there's a gap in ch are not a priori related. The way that there would be a relationship is if a sound like the palatal stops were just had such a strong tendency to change and never to stay in their position, that's why you would see a gap there, because sounds never stay there for long. Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious. I'd have to read more. In particular, the citation that they give. Anyway, affricates. Within manner, affricate gaps are infrequent. Not a lot of gapping going on in the affricates. So it should be pointed out that this is all within manner. So within manner gaps, we have ones for stops, we have ones for fricatives, for affricates, not common. Yeah, it is hard to visualize these gaps. Hopefully we will see some visualizations soon. Okay, let's see if we do. Anything? Can you give us anything? Okay, well that's a visualization. That's kind of interesting. All right, well, we'll get to that, I guess. Between manner gaps. Between manner gaps. Gauss. Thank you, Thomas. Okay. I was told, by the way, that the waveform of me saying is very recognizable, and it's so very easy to chop out. I wonder if I'll have to keep saying exactly the same way so that it doesn't give Lucy any trouble in the editing. Between manner gaps. Operationalized as a situation when an inventory lacks a voiced or voiceless stop. Okay, so we're just repeating our definition. Where's between manner? So we're missing one of the voiced voiceless pairs in one place of articulation. In one manner of articulation, when another place of articulation has the full pair. Okay, so that's like this. Let's see if there's anything else we need to learn here. Some weirdness with okay, let me take a second to read this. There's just a fact that there aren't as many fricative places of articulation. Oh, no, wait, that's the other way around. There just aren't as many places of articulation for stops. So there are no labiodental stops, there are no interdental stops, there are no pharyngeal stops. But there are fricatives at each of those places of articulation. So this is actually going to give us some inverse gaps, but the author's not very interested in them because it makes sense, right? If you can't make a stop there physiologically, articulatorily, you can't do it. So it's not super interesting other than just that kind of bare fact that, yeah, you can't make an interdental stop. I don't know. Anyway, where are we going with this? Let's take a look at these gaps, direct gaps. Some of the fricatives can only be within manner gaps because they do not have a corresponding stop. Yeah, so this is the stuff that we talked about before. So there are no stops. There's no voiced glottal stop, for instance. There are no interdental stops. So that's fine. That I don't think is that interesting for us. And there are some fricatives that are only between manner gaps. Oh, and these are kind of interesting. So a pre-nasalized voiced velar fricative, a pre-nasalized voiced palatal fricative. So the first, they're not sorted by frequency, but that's interesting. All right, so let's see. These are all fairly rare. Oh, I'm starting to fade from the heat. I'm going to have to take a break soon. Just finish this little section. So we have these fairly rare, exclusively between manner fricative gaps. So nr, between manner. So let's say fricative gaps found exclusively between manner are rare. Most common is this nr. Nr. I don't even know. I've never heard that before. Does anyone know where that, what language would have that? Okay, what else? Between manner fricative gaps. Okay, so then we have a bunch that are also found as within manner gaps. Of those found, of those between manner gaps found also within manner, the vastly most common one is ch. And it's actually interesting because it's found as a between manner gap much more frequently than it's found as a within manner gap. What does that mean? We have to come back to this terminology. This terminology is a bit tough for me. I don't know about you. So, ch is more commonly found as a between manner gap. Right? Yeah. As more frequently found as a between manner gap than a within manner gap. What does that mean? So it's more likely, okay, brain is breaking. It's more likely that it is found that ch is missing when you have. So what would be the gap generating triplet for this? So it would be k, g, r, but no ch. So this would be the between manner, right? Between manner fixed. Oh, no, wait. This is the within manner. Within manner gaps, fixed manner, varying place and voice onset time. No, wait. Okay, I can't do this right now. I am overheating. So I'm going to take a break. YouTube, yeah, stay cool. We will see you in the next segment. I'll be right back. Okay. Oh, we're going to see if we can do this. I splashed water all over my face. It instantly evaporated. We are back. Okay, so I think I got it. I took some time, and looks like Elijah also took some time. Let's take a look. Oh, yeah. YouTube, it's really hot. I'm not going to do a whole thing. Just hi. It's nice to have you, but we got to get back into this paper. Okay, so I think this is what we're dealing with. Within manner, everything is the same manner. So everything is a fricative. That makes sense. Everything is a fricative, and we're just looking at, we have different places and voicings of the fricatives. So we have, say, f, v, and we have r, but no ch. Right, within manner. We also have the between manner, which actually I kind of want to just call within voicing. Because I think that's a little bit better. So between manner, fixed voice onset time, so fixed voicing. So everything here is voiceless, and we vary place and manner. So we have stops. We have stops at the labial, fricative at the labial. Stop at the dorsal, no, or velar, no velar fricative. That is what we're looking at. This more common, less common for. Okay, so that's what it's saying. Okay. Chat, what do you think? Within voicing, do we like it? I think I like it. Great. Okay, so then what else do we have? The between manner, the within voicing gaps. So we are lacking other common gaps. So we're talking about fricatives here. So let's get this. Fricatives, other common gaps. F, R, here. Interesting. Huh. So this is where, if you have huh, this would be something where you have like a glottal stop, because we're between manner. So if you have a between manner gap for huh, that implies you have, say, like you have pa, fa, and you have but no huh. I think that's what we're dealing with. Okay, great. Let's not spend a great deal of time on this because my brain is breaking a bit. Okay, what is the take home here? Conclusion. We have biases against places of articulation, i.e., more likely to acquire voiced coronal fricatives, or more prone to acquire voiced coronal fricatives than voiceless labiodental or velar. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, and then what do we learn for this? For the within manner, we learned that we're biased against voice. Obstruents. And we can write this probably rather acquire voiced coronal than then voiceless labiodental revealer. Hey Sparsh, welcome. We're trying to beat the heat. We're trying to understand the nature of consonant inventory gaps. And I don't know if we're being entirely successful at either task, but we're giving it our honest try, and that's really what matters. Right, okay. We have not going to worry too much about this inverse business. Let's see what the conclusion is. Rather profound differences in how sub-inventories are structured in different languages. Okay, interesting. So let's talk about the voiceless retroflex stop. It's a rather common between manner gap in inventories with the retroflex sh. So you would have some retroflexes, but not the stop, not the voiceless stop. So you'd have sh, but not ta. Mandarin, I guess, would be a good example of this kind of an inventory. Yeah, so such inventories are characteristic of Uralic and Sino-Tibetan languages of the Circum-Tibetan area. But in Africa, apparently we have the same gap. We have the same tra gap, voiceless retroflex stop. But instead of having the sh be the thing that points to the gap, it's da. It's the voiced equivalent. So here's it's like 3 types of retroflex systems. Type 1, so we can call this the Circum-Tibetan type. Note that this is not the only place where these occur, but this is kind of characteristic. So retroflex fricatives, but so 1 or 2 retroflex fricatives. The African, where you have 1 retroflex stop in the inventory, and then the full system where retroflex is its own like fully featured place of articulation, stops, fricatives, and maybe even affricates. That's kind of a neat aside. And this is where I think the real meat of typology kind of comes in, for me at least, is when we get this idea that there are kind of 3 types. Like what we were considering when we look at the constant inventory, we see this column that says retroflex, and we assume that retroflex is kind of the same everywhere. But it turns out that languages organize their retroflex systems kind of differently, and we can put them into 3 sort of groups. That's cool. That's, I think, an innovation. So awesome. Oh yeah. Pixel Music says nap. Naps occurred. I feel like there might be a nap occurring in my future as well. All right. I think I need to hydrate because I feel my voice starting to get a bit scratchy. 1 sec. Yeah, hydration is an issue today. Okay, and I don't even have as bad heat as those in Northern Europe have today. It's only 33 here today, not 43. So my heart goes out to you if you're in that heat right now and you're not in a place with air conditioning, as I am also not, because of the stream. Alrighty, where were we? Fricatives and affricates. Didn't we just do fricatives? Oh no, we were doing stops. But sometimes I wonder. Stops and fricatives. Fricatives and affricates. I guess we're talking about fricatives a lot. I'm kind of confused there. Oh, this is comparing stops and fricatives because yeah, we're between manner. Okay. So stops and fricatives and affricates. It's really interesting the cognitive load that a paper can put on you, and you have to sort of enter into the world of this paper, which creates its own new terminology, its own set of oppositions, its own things for you to sort of hold in your mind as you're reading it, defining its terms at the start, and then you have to sort of carry those forward. And it's actually quite difficult, as we're finding today. Of course, we're not in ideal circumstances, but when are we ever? Okay, so fricatives and affricates. All right, so direct between manner affricate gaps. Here's that terminology coming again. So I'm going to copy down our definition. Between manner affricate gaps. These are fixed voicing, varying place and manner. So you have, it's where you have an affricate in one spot, but then is when you say have a stop and an affricate in, or sorry, a fricative and an affricate in two places. So say you have s, f, s, f, and you also have ts, but you don't have pf. That's what this is telling us. Pf is a, so most common is pf. Next, we have ts and k. And then we get v. So this would be if you have a language that has v, z, z, but no v. And I think if we've explored a lot of different languages and seen a lot of different inventories, these sort of make sense. It's very common for us to see those affricates clustering around in the coronal place and not extending to the labial place. So we may have ts, but many languages lack pf when they have ts, even if they do have p or f. So German is a language, an example of a language that does not have this gap, but many languages with ts do have this gap. But the thing that's a bit uncommon or unexpected is the presence of ts here. Ts is what I would think of as the most common, or one of the most common places of articulation to have an affricate at. But it is explained here that the presence of ch is causing this gap. So we have, say, a system like s, sh, ch, which is the English system. And so we have this ts gap there. Between manner gap of ts. Interesting. Yeah, and then the rest are less common. I feel like I'm back in Arizona again. I remember when I moved to Arizona for the first time, when I moved to Arizona, because I've only ever moved there once. They told me if you are thirsty, it's already too late. The rate of evaporation is so high that you have to sort of keep drinking it if you're not thirsty, so that you don't get to the point where you feel it, because if you feel it, it's already kind of gone too far. I mean, nothing too bad is going to happen to you, but you should drink. All right, so yeah, cool. What is our next step? Okay. Let's learn about the relationship between gaps and inventory size, and we may be able to. I'll put in a quick break. No, you know what? Let's just forge ahead. I don't want to give Lucy more segments to catch up on. So, gaps in inventory size. One question that arises when looking at data on gaps is whether there's a limiting ratio of gaps to the number of segments in an inventory that languages converge to. Okay, so let's restate that. Do large inventories tend to have more gaps than smaller ones? Well, they have more opportunities to, certainly. Right, there we are. They have more opportunities to have gaps because they're just more, there are more segments, so there can be more gaps. But how skewed can these large inventories become? Interestingly, says the author, it's actually small inventories which tend to be more skewed than large inventories, which is kind of interesting. Actually, that's really interesting, because you would definitely expect the larger inventories, because they have more just opportunities, to have more gaps. Huh. Cool. Coolio. Okay, so what? The absolute number of gaps grows in linear fashion with the inventory size. The maximum value is 13. But the ratio of the number of gaps to the inventory size quickly stabilizes to 0.08. Interesting. So if you have a gap, if you have an inventory size of 20, let's see if we can look at this on the map. If you have interesting. Okay, interesting. Here's the ratio, right? So this is just the raw count of number of gaps as the inventory size goes up. As you can see, smaller inventories seem to be more common. As we go farther right, there are fewer languages, and so things get a bit fluty out here. They trombone out. I don't know. Is that a valid thing to say? So we have, I don't know, on average a gap count of about 2 if you have an inventory size of 20. Granted, there's a lot of dispersion around that, so I don't know how much we can really say. And then this is the ratio. So it seems that the smaller inventories have more gaps on average, with a ratio of like 0.15 at the smaller end. Granted, I don't know exactly what number this is. It can't be 0 because no language has 0 consonants, right? But then it stabilizes out, although granted there is not a lot of data coming at the end. Interesting. Interesting. All right, so the ratio of gaps to inventory size is higher for smaller inventories. As inventories get larger, the ratio stabilizes to about 0.8. This happens at around 30 segments. Cool. Okay, so, and I don't know where this, I'm going to place the stress on this, but Dandvadan is saying that very large inventories will have a series of constants that differ in one feature, such as phonation, additional secondary articulation. The conclusion isn't that unintuitive. Yeah, I see where you're coming from with that. It also kind of comes down to the fact that this paper considers gaps only from a very particular perspective. It's only within stops, fricatives, and affricates. It's only with respect to voice-voiceless pairs, and it's yeah. So that's a limitation that was imposed to make the study doable. But it's important to keep that in mind. You know, many languages distinguish more types of phonation, more voice onset times. You know, we have aspiration. We have, you know, other kinds of constants altogether. So yeah. What do we have to say about areas? The 5 most common within manner stopgaps for all macro areas, so this is looking at areal effects, are given in table 12. Okay, where's table 12? Oh, it's does this viewer let me rotate? No. All right, well, we're gonna ignore that for now. We are going to ignore that for now. Let's go on to see, what does this have to say about sound change? Okay, this is kind of interesting. Where do gaps come from? Gaps arise due to sound changes. The loss of P in Proto-Celtic is a classic case, right? We have Latin pater, Irish aher. So this was there at one point, but as is reflected in the Latin cognate, but not anymore. So we lost the P in Celtic. It's also been argued that process of sound change can be shaped by structural asymmetries, thereby performing a gap filling function. So that's an interesting idea, that languages sort of abhor a vacuum, and if there's one of these gaps, then sound change will quickly fill it, or maybe not quickly, but will tend to fill it. That seems interesting. That's an interesting thought. I don't know if that's true, and neither does the author of this paper, because we would need to have a database of reconstructions, and we don't have it. But testing if there are connections between present-day gaps and sound changes is more straightforward, as one only needs access to a sample of sound change processes. Okay, interesting. Hey, this might be interesting, chat. Unidia, I'm assuming, project. A combined dataset of 13,000 sound change processes has been compiled by me based on the data from these sources, augmented with additional data on Sino-Tibetan languages. The sound changes in these dataset are of 3 types: deletion of single segments, epenthesis of single segments, and single segment to single segment change. It's a very skewed dataset because mostly they are from African and Eurasian languages. But given this data set, we can see if a particular segment is more likely to be a source of a sound change or a reflex, that is the output of a sound change. Interesting. I don't know. I don't know enough about this data set that the author's using to be able to say what's going on here, but I'm kind of just mostly interested in the data set itself. Can we actually... looks like the link is broken. I really wanted to read that. Where did it go? Wait, where did it go? Where did it go? Hello? Am I going nuts? Okay, Chad, I don't want you to see this display. This is embarrassing. Okay, yeah, never mind. That didn't happen. Maybe we can manually... This is the riveting content that I know you tune in for, is me manually trying to go to links. Copy link. They messed up the URL. Well, I think we may be out of luck. This was probably once a noble database. This is kind of like what I'm thinking here is this is basically the index diachronica, but done into a format that can be queried. And that's kind of interesting. I don't know exactly what we want to say about it because we can't get into it, but what does the author say? The author says that constants corresponding to major within manner stopgaps are indeed more likely to undergo a change than to be a reflex of a change. Interesting. So the idea is that the author has collected all of these sound changes that are, a sound can be a source segment. It can be the thing that the sound was, or the thing that the sound becomes in any given sound change. And it seems that the consonants corresponding to the major within manner gaps in stops. So within manner, we remember, is fixing the manner, varying the place and voice onset times. So something like if we have pa, ba, ka, but no ga, right? That would be a within manner stopgap. So it seems that these are more likely in this database to be on the left side of the arrow for a sound change, G to whatever, versus on the right side of the arrow. So we have more we have more instances recorded of sound changes where G becomes something than where something becomes G. Now, I don't know if we can do, I don't know, what is this really telling us? Is this telling us something about the kind of languages that we've documented, given that those tend to be mostly Eurasian languages? I don't know. It's interesting. It's definitely provocative. Okay, so that's kind of cool. So what is the conclusion that the paper draws from this? The discrepancy seems to indicate that gaps and stops and fricatives arise in two different ways. Fricative gaps are the product of inventory growth. Inventory is acquiring some fricatives and not others. Whereas stop gaps are more likely to arise due to the loss of segments. So that's an interesting hypothesis. Let's write that down because that's kind of cool. So the hypothesis is fricative gaps occur because languages acquire fricatives, but not everywhere. Stop gaps occur because languages lose stops, but not everywhere. Well, that's interesting, and I wonder how we could test that. But for conlangers, if you are watching this and you're a conlanger, you may want to use this as inspiration in your own work. Echo asks, has this been saved on any Internet Archive sites? I doubt that would work because it looks like it's a dynamically generated sort of database accessing program. So I will have to look into that. Yeah, doesn't look super promising. That's a shame. That's a shame. Okay, and then we talk about inventory gaps and segment borrowing. So then the idea is, if we have an inventory gap, is it going to be filled by borrowing from other languages? If a language lacks a typologically frequent consonant and borrows words from other languages, chances are high that those words will contain the missing segment. Therefore, it's hard to establish real bias in this regard. Yeah, interesting. I don't know if we can say a lot about that. Okay, so interesting. This has been an interesting experiment. I'm going to just do a few conclusions here. So I'm going to come back. So what have we learned about the nature of reading linguistics papers? Well, it's something that requires quite a lot of concentration and it probably should be done with a certain amount of climate control. But other than that, we've learned that linguistics papers have a sort of characteristic organization, that we should approach them with a particular topic in mind, rather than just trying to take everything we can get from it. Now, in this case, our topic was pretty broad, so we ended up taking quite a lot from the paper. But notice that we didn't worry so much about the history of the question, who else has done the research. If we wanted to delve more into this question, that's something that we would probably want to do. And if we were writing a paper ourselves on it, we would definitely have to do that. We learned a few things about gaps. We learned of a good way of formalizing them so we can actually run these sorts of, or not run, but we can do these sorts of studies. We've learned what some particularly common gaps are in stops, fricatives, and affricates. And we have a really intriguing hypothesis about the source of gaps in consonant systems, which is that fricative gaps occur because languages acquire fricatives, but not at every place of articulation at the same time. And stop gaps occur because a language loses stops, but not in every place of articulation at the same time, which is kind of interesting. So I think we'll stop here. YouTube, you have been a joy to, in the future, present this to, I guess, if that makes sense. Come back next time. If you like this whole style of segment, by all means, let us know in the description and, all that good jazz, like and subscribe and the things I'm supposed to say, but always forget to. And we will see you next time. And chat, I'm just going to hang out here with you for another 10 minutes because there are a few things that are kind of fun coming up. The biggest fun thing that's coming up is we have on Friday, so not at a normal stream time, so everyone keep that in mind. At Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern, we're having a special stream with a special guest, James Tandy, the Mayanist. So we're going to have a chance to ask all sorts of questions about the Mayan family. We're going to learn a ton. I'm extremely excited. We're going to be talking about Mayan phylogenetics. So we're going to be talking about how the relationship of different Mayan languages to each other, what the historical situation looks like, what the aerial situation looks like. Mesoamerica is a well-known linguistic area with effects that go that travel from language to language without necessarily being confined to a genetic branch of a family. We're going to be talking about things like tone. We're going to be talking about things like ergativity. And so I encourage you to set your calendars for this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Come, bring your questions. We have, one of the world's experts on the Mayan family coming, so it's going to be very exciting. Other than that, if you're in Northern Europe, I really wish that you get through this heat wave. I know it's tough because not a lot of the buildings there are really built to withstand heat, but you can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. I don't know I can do it, but I have faith in you. You can do it. Otherwise, chat, what's going on with you? Melting? Are you going to get some relief tomorrow? I hope so. Yeah, make sure that the sun's not beating down on you. If you have blinds, shut them. I guess it's getting quite late there now, so you're unlikely to have them open anyway. What issue would get me throwing the most chairs? I'm a peaceful guy, I don't know. Someone in Discord said that they would never be afraid of someone named Colin, and I mean, I see why. I get it. Yeah. I don't know. What would get me throwing the most chairs? What grinds my gears linguistically? I find what I don't love is the kind of the sniping between subfields, not subfields, but between like theoretical approaches. I find that there's not a lot of, and I think most people would probably agree with this. This isn't really a hot take. There's not a lot of talking to each other between different camps in linguistics. And I think that's a bit of a shame because there aren't that many linguists out there. And, if we can't talk to each other, how do we expect anyone else to want to talk to us? So that's my hot take on the ecumenical situation within linguistics. Maybe Colin Firth is intimidating too. I don't know. What do I think about the linguistic? So the book or the Linguistics Wars, the book, or the Linguistics Wars, the historical event? Because I'll just tell you both. The book is amazing. I've not read the latest edition. I used that book extensively in grad school to form an understanding of the period and of the sort of genealogy of the field. That was a really, really good read, and there is a new edition out which I'm going to want to read at some point. The historical event. Oh, so for those of you who don't know, the Linguistics Wars refers to a sort of theoretical division within linguistics, mainly in the US, that happened from the 60s to the 80s, roughly. And, well, I went to I got my PhD at a department that now houses Noam Chomsky, so that might tell you sort of what my upbringing was like. So I went to a very generative, well, not a reasonably generative department. For those of you who don't know this stuff, this is sort of inside baseball. So I heard the story from just that one side. And so the Linguistics Wars was this period from the 60s to the 80s where the sort of Chomsky's first generation of students and his second generation of students sort of had a falling out over how to interpret the theories, and there's a lot of personal animosity that went into it, and yada, yada, yada. There are departments that sort of descend from different factions in that era. And I think that the repercussions of it still echo to this day. But yeah, it's a fun topic to investigate. And the interesting thing about that as a historical event is you can actually talk to a lot of the people who were involved. and get their perspectives. And it's amusing, to say the least. Oh, it's good. I'm really looking forward to the stream on Monday. I think it's going to be quite fun. I don't know anything about Mayan. We're gonna talk. Can you imagine? We're gonna talk about historical phonology. It's gonna be amazing. Okay, so everyone, before I leave you, put it on your calendar. This Friday, 2 p.m. It's going to happen. What else? Then I will see you again next Tuesday after that for another stream. And I think there may be some world building in the future. So something to look forward to. Right, chat? Well, I'm off. See you. Oh, wait, I see a question come in that I want to actually answer before we go. The book that was so you're talking about the work of Benjamin Lee Whorf, I think. So it would be, you could look in language, I think it's called Language, Thought and Reality, the collective writings of Benjamin Lee Whorf. It's available on Internet Archive, or it was. I don't know if it still is. But yeah. Or there are, I think, PDFs hanging around online if you Google them. It's a pretty old book, so I don't know if, I assume it's out of copyright, but I'm not sure. Yeah. Other than that, chat, stay cool. You know you are. Until next time.